I'm Savannah Mitchell, 28, and I never thought I'd see my parents in court with me on the opposing side. As I walked down the aisle toward the witness stand, my mother's eyes rolled dramatically and my father looked away in disgust. But when I pulled out the recordings that would change everything, the judge's expression shifted from routine boredom to genuine shock. What my own flesh and blood had done was about to be exposed to the world. Hey everyone! Before I dive into the full story of how I ended up facing my parents in court, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This family drama took twists I never saw coming, and I bet many of you have dealt with family betrayal too. If you're enjoying family revenge stories like mine, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm show these justice-served moments to others who need to hear them. Now let's rewind to where it all began. Growing up in rural Connecticut, our family home was everything to me. The sprawling Victorian house had been in our family for 4 generations, with its wraparound porch where I spent countless summer evenings, reading the massive oak tree in the backyard where my grandfather had built me a treehouse, and the flower gardens my grandmother had lovingly cultivated for decades. The house wasn't just a structure, it was the physical embodiment of our family history. "This will all be yours someday, Savannah," my grandfather William would say, his weathered hand gesturing across the property. He'd pull out old photo albums showing the house through the years, pointing out how each generation had added their own touches while preserving its historical integrity. "Your cousins have their own inheritances mapped out, but you've always loved this place the most." My parents, Richard and Eleanor Mitchell, had built their own modern home across town, never sharing Grandpa William's attachment to the old house. They were successful corporate lawyers who valued efficiency and minimalism, not the creaking floorboards and constant maintenance the Victorian required. They never understood why I chose to move in with Grandpa after college, instead of taking the apartment they offered to pay for in Boston. For 5 years I lived with him, helping manage his care as his health declined. I cooked his meals, drove him to medical appointments, and spent evenings listening to his stories about the family. During this time, I put my own career aspirations on hold, turning down a promising position at a marketing firm in New York to be there for him. My parents visited occasionally, always commenting on how I was wasting my potential by playing nurse. "You could be making 6 figures by now," my mother would say, glancing around the house with thinly veiled contempt. "Instead, you're dusting antiques and changing sheets." What they didn't understand was that these years with Grandpa were precious to me. He taught me about resilience, about valuing what matters in life beyond material success. When he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, the doctors gave him 6 months. I made every day count, recording his stories, taking photos, and helping him organize his affairs. "I've updated my will," he told me, one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "The house goes to you, Savannah. You're the only one who truly loves it." He handed me a sealed envelope. "This is a copy. Keep it safe. Your parents might not understand my decision." I felt torn, grateful for his trust in me, but uncomfortable discussing his death so pragmatically. "Grandpa, you don't need to, I want to," he insisted. "You've put your life on hold for me. This house should go to someone who will cherish it, not sell it to the highest bidder the moment I'm gone." When Grandpa William passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 months later, I was devastated. The funeral was a somber affair with relatives from across the country coming to pay their respects. My parents handled most of the arrangements, taking charge as they always did in family matters. "We'll need to meet with Lawrence Hemingway, your grandfather's attorney, next week, about the will," my father informed me the day after the funeral. Something in his tone made me uneasy, a subtle smugness I couldn't quite place. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Monday at Mr. Hemingway's office downtown. I arrived early, clutching the envelope Grandpa had given me. My parents arrived exactly on time, dressed in their courtroom attire as if preparing for a high-stakes case. Mr. Hemingway, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had been my grandfather's friend for over 40 years, greeted us solemnly. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to express my condolences. William was a dear friend and I know how much he valued family." As Mr. Hemingway began reading the will, I noticed my parents exchanging small, satisfied glances. Something was wrong. When he reached the part about the house, my heart stopped. "To my son Richard and his wife Eleanor, I leave my family home and all its contents with the understanding that they will preserve its historical significance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This directly contradicted what Grandpa had told me. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope he had given me, pulling out the document inside a copy of his will that clearly stated the house was to be left to me. "Excuse me," I interrupted, my voice barely steady. "There must be some mistake. I have a copy of the will here that says something different." Mr. Hemingway frowned, examining the paper I handed him. "This is indeed in William's handwriting, but the official will filed with me has different provisions. This document isn't legally binding, Miss Mitchell." My father cleared his throat. "Dad was getting confused near the end, Savannah. He probably wrote that during one of his less lucid moments." The room seemed to spin around me. Grandpa had been sharp until the very end. Everyone who spent time with him knew that. I looked at my parents' faces and saw something I'd never noticed before: calculation. Cold, strategic calculation. "When was the official will updated?" I asked Mr. Hemingway. "3 weeks before your grandfather's passing," he replied, checking the date. "He came in with your parents who witnessed the signing 3 weeks before he died, when I had taken a weekend trip to visit my college roommate. The first time I'd left Grandpa's side in months. The timing couldn't have been a coincidence." As we left the attorney's office, my mother placed a manicured hand on my shoulder. "We know you're disappointed, sweetheart, but we have plans for the property that make much more financial sense. We can discuss giving you a portion of the proceeds when we sell." "Sell?" I echoed, pulling away from her touch. "You're going to sell the house?" My father nodded, matter-of-factly. "We've already had discussions with a developer. The land alone is worth millions. They'll tear down that money pit and build luxury condos." In that moment, something hardened inside me. The parents I thought I knew would never have manipulated a dying man to change his will. They wouldn't have betrayed his wishes and mine so callously. But the strangers standing before me, discussing the demolition of our family legacy for profit, were capable of exactly that. "This isn't over," I said quietly, turning away before they could see the tears welling in my eyes. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined to fight for what Grandpa William had wanted, for what he had promised me. The next morning, I woke up determined to uncover the truth. The disconnect between Grandpa's clear intentions and the official will was too stark to ignore. Grandpa William had been meticulous his entire life, a former judge himself who understood the importance of legal documentation. The idea that he would give me one version of his will while filing another made no sense. My first stop was to see Martha, Grandpa's home health nurse, who had come 3 times a week during his final months. Martha had become a friend during those difficult days, and I trusted her observations of Grandpa's mental state. Confused, Martha scoffed when I mentioned my father's claim. "Your grandfather was sharp as a tack until the end. Just 2 days before he passed, we were discussing a Supreme Court ruling in detail. He even beat me at chess that afternoon." "Did you ever notice my parents trying to get him alone or pressuring him about the will?" I asked. Martha hesitated, her expression growing troubled. "There was one visit when you were away. Your father brought some papers for William to sign. I remember because your grandfather seemed agitated afterward. He told me, 'They think I'm a fool because I'm dying, but I know exactly what they're up to.' This confirmed my suspicions, but it wasn't proof. I needed more. Next, I visited Mr. Hemingway's office again, this time alone. "I know this is difficult, Savannah," the attorney said kindly when I explained my concerns. "But the signed will is legally binding. Without evidence of coercion or mental incapacity, there's little that can be done." "Can I at least see a copy of the signed document?" I asked. "And the visitor log from that day. I want to know who else was present." Mr. Hemingway hesitated but eventually relented, retrieving the file. The signature did look like Grandpa's, though perhaps shakier than usual. The witnesses listed were my parents and Mr. Hemingway's assistant, Brenda. I decided to speak with Brenda next, finding her alone at the reception desk during lunch hour. "I remember that day," she said nervously, after I explained why I was there. "It was unusual. Unusual how your grandfather seemed, not himself. Very subdued. Your parents did most of the talking." She lowered her voice. "Between us, I thought he might have been medicated. His eyes were glassy and he needed help holding the pen." My heart raced. "Did you mention this to Mr. Hemingway?" I tried, but she glanced toward her boss's office. "Your parents are important clients of the firm." Mr. Hemingway assured me everything was proper. This was valuable information, but still not enough. I needed concrete evidence. That's when I remembered Grandpa's habit of recording important conversations, a practice from his days as a judge. He kept a small digital recorder in his desk drawer, using it to capture his thoughts and occasionally our discussions about family history. Racing back to the house, which technically still belonged to my parents until the will was fully executed, I used my key to enter. I headed straight for Grandpa's study, hoping the recorder would still be there and that my parents hadn't cleared everything out yet. The house felt eerily quiet as I searched through his desk. Relief washed over me when I found the recorder exactly where he always kept it, along with several memory cards neatly labeled with dates. I grabbed everything and left before my parents could discover I'd been there. Back at my apartment, I spent hours listening to recordings. Most were benign: Grandpa dictating memoirs, our conversations about family recipes, his thoughts on books he was reading. Then, I found one dated the day my parents had visited with the new will. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Grandpa's voice came through, sounding groggy but lucid enough to be clearly objecting. "Richard, I've already made my will. The house goes to Savannah. She's the only one who cares about preserving it." My father's voice responded, "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. We've discussed this. The property is worth millions if developed. Savannah can't afford the taxes and upkeep. This makes more financial sense for everyone." "I don't care about financial sense," Grandpa argued weakly. "That house has been in our family for generations." My mother's voice chimed in, "William, just take these pills. They'll help with your pain, and then we can discuss this reasonably." There was the sound of water being poured, some shuffling, and then silence for a few minutes. When the conversation resumed, Grandpa's voice was noticeably more slurred. "What? What am I signing?" "Just the updated will we discussed, Dad. Don't worry about the details, we've taken care of everything." The recording continued, documenting what was clearly my grandfather being manipulated while under the influence of strong medication. I felt sick listening to it, but also vindicated. This was the proof I needed. There were more recordings from the following days. Grandpa expressing regret and concern about what had happened, stating clearly that he had been pressured into signing something while medicated, and reaffirming that he wanted me to have the house. Most damning of all was a conversation between my parents that Grandpa had apparently recorded secretly when they visited again, thinking he was asleep. "Once we sell this place, we can finally get that vacation home in the Bahamas," my mother said, "and Richard Jr. can have the boat he's been wanting," my father added. William never understood the concept of leveraging assets, all that sentimental attachment to a house that's falling apart. "At least we won't have to worry about Savannah contesting the will," my mother replied. "Lawrence assured me everything is legally tight, and she doesn't have the resources to fight it anyway." poor girl actually thinks her grandfather wanted her to dust antiques for the rest of her life," my father laughed. "We're doing her a favor, really." I sat in stunned silence when the recording ended. The parents I thought I knew, who had taught me about integrity and justice, had deliberately manipulated my dying grandfather, drugged him to get him to sign a document against his wishes, and planned to discard our family heritage for luxury items. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. With shaking hands, I copied all the relevant recordings and began researching estate attorneys. I found Amelia Washington, who specialized in contested wills and elder abuse. After listening to the recordings, she agreed to take my case. "This is textbook undue influence and possible elder abuse," she said firmly. "With these recordings, we have a strong case to contest the will." I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the battle ahead. My parents had resources and connections, but I had the truth and Grandpa's own voice to back it up. "Let's do this," I told Amelia. "Not just for me, but for Grandpa and everything he wanted to preserve." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparations. Amelia Washington proved to be exactly the advocate I needed, tenacious, detail-oriented, and genuinely outraged by what my parents had done. She filed a petition to contest the will on grounds of undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and elder abuse. The court date was set for 3 months later. My parents' response was swift and ruthless. They hired Bradford Reynolds, one of the most expensive and aggressive estate litigators in the state. A cease and desist letter arrived at my apartment demanding I turn over all recordings, claiming they were obtained illegally and constituted an invasion of privacy. "They're trying to intimidate you," Amelia assured me when I called her in a panic. "But Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recordings. Your grandfather had every right to record conversations in his own home, and as his caregiver and resident, you had legitimate access to those recordings." Still, the pressure was immense. My parents didn't stop at legal threats. They began a campaign of isolation, reaching out to family members and mutual friends to paint me as a greedy, unstable daughter who couldn't accept her grandfather's final wishes. "Savannah always had an unhealthy attachment to that house," my mother told my Aunt Patricia, who then called to try to convince me to drop the case. "We're worried about her. She's fabricating stories now, even doctoring recordings. The grief has affected her judgment." Most painful was the call from my brother Richard Jr., who had always been closer to our parents than to me. "Sav, you need to let this go," he urged during a tense phone conversation. "Mom and Dad are devastated that you would accuse them of something so horrible. They've always wanted what's best for all of us." "Did you listen to the recordings, Rich?" I asked. A pause. "I don't need to. I know our parents." "Do you?" Because I thought I did too. One by one, family, friends, and relatives took sides, most aligning with my parents, who had the advantage of their sterling reputation as respected attorneys. Only my cousin Emma and my childhood friend Leah stood firmly by me, offering emotional support and helping me gather additional evidence. Emma, who worked in digital forensics, authenticated the recordings and provided an affidavit confirming they hadn't been tampered with. Leah, a pharmaceutical technician, reviewed Grandpa's medication records and confirmed that the pain medication he'd been prescribed would have significantly impaired his cognitive function at the dosage my parents had given him. Meanwhile, I was struggling financially. I had depleted my savings paying Amelia's retainer, and job prospects were limited due to the time demands of the case. My parents, knowing this, made their first settlement offer through their attorney $50,000 if I dropped the case immediately. "That's insulting," Amelia said when the offer came through. "The property is worth at least $3.5 million, according to our appraiser." "It's not about the money," I insisted. "It's about honoring Grandpa's wishes and holding my parents accountable." As the court date approached, the pressure intensified. My parents' attorney filed motion after motion attempting to get the case dismissed or the recordings suppressed. Each required a response from Amelia, draining my financial resources further. Then came the most unexpected blow. Mr. Hemingway, my grandfather's trusted attorney and friend for decades, submitted an affidavit supporting my parents' version of events. He claimed that Grandpa had been perfectly lucid when signing the updated will, and had expressed concerns about my financial irresponsibility as his reason for changing his mind about the inheritance. This was a blatant lie. Grandpa had always praised my careful handling of money, often commenting that I was the only grandchild who wasn't constantly asking for handouts. Mr. Hemingway's betrayal felt almost as painful as my parents'. Why would he lie like this? I asked, Amelia devastated. She looked troubled. I've been doing some digging. Your parents' firm and Hemingway's have been involved in several major real estate developments together over the past 5 years. There's a significant financial relationship there that creates a conflict of interest he never disclosed. This revelation gave us another angle to pursue, but it also highlighted the uphill battle we were facing. My parents had connections and influence throughout the legal community, while I was rapidly running out of resources to fight. 2 weeks before the court date, I received an eviction notice for my apartment. I had fallen behind on rent while focusing on the case. That same day, I learned that I'd been passed over for a job I'd interviewed for because of a concerning call the employer had received about me. The walls were closing in. My parents were using every lever of their influence to pressure me into giving up. That night, alone in my apartment with an eviction notice on the table, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since the battle began. The weight of fighting my own family, of having my character assassinated by the people who raised me, felt overwhelming. As I sat there contemplating whether to continue the fight, my phone lit up with a text from Emma. Found something. Coming over now. Emma arrived 20 minutes later, her expression a mix of excitement and disbelief. I was going through the digital copies of the documents your parents submitted to the court, she explained, pulling out her laptop. I ran them through some forensic software that analyzes document metadata, and look at this. She showed me technical details I didn't fully understand, but her explanation was clear enough. The will my parents had submitted showed signs of digital manipulation. The signature page had been scanned separately from the rest of the document and then merged. They could have had your grandfather sign a different document entirely, then attached his signature to the fraudulent will, Emma explained. The metadata timestamps don't match up. This was a game changer. Combined with the recordings and the testimonies we'd gathered, we now had technical evidence of potential forgery. We need to get this to Amelia immediately, I said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. That night I made a decision. I would not back down no matter what pressure my parents applied. Grandpa William had stood for integrity his entire life. He deserved to have his true wishes honored, and I would see this through, not just for the house but for the truth. As I prepared for court, I received one final settlement offer from my parents, $500,000, and an agreement not to pursue criminal charges against me for defamation and evidence tampering. The offer confirmed what I already knew: they were getting desperate. They knew their deception was about to be exposed in court. I declined without hesitation. The day before the hearing, I visited Grandpa's grave, placing fresh flowers beside his headstone. I won't let them erase what you built, I promised him. Tomorrow the truth comes out. The morning of the hearing arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, ironically a birthday gift from my parents 2 years earlier, and met Amelia at her office to review our strategy one final time. They'll try to discredit you personally, she warned. Bradford Reynolds is known for aggressive cross-examination. He'll paint you as resentful, entitled, financially desperate, anything to distract from the actual evidence. Stay calm and stick to the facts. When we arrived at the courthouse, I was surprised by the crowd. Word of the case had spread, and several local news outlets had sent reporters. Apparently, the story of a daughter accusing her prominent attorney parents of elder abuse and will fraud was too juicy to ignore. My parents were already there, looking polished and confident in matching charcoal suits. They stood surrounded by their legal team like generals prepared for battle. When they spotted me, my mother's eyes rolled dramatically, and my father turned away in disgust, a performance clearly intended for the gathering spectators, and perhaps the judge. The courtroom felt intimidatingly formal as we filed in. Judge Caroline Winters, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, presided. The proceedings began with opening statements. Bradford Reynolds went first, painting a picture of a loving son and daughter-in-law who had cared deeply for William Mitchell, making difficult but necessary financial decisions to protect his estate from a granddaughter who, while well-meaning, lacked the financial acumen to maintain a historic property. William Mitchell changed his will of sound mind and body, Reynolds asserted confidently. He recognized that his granddaughter's emotional attachment to the property was clouding her judgment about what was best for the family legacy. The petitioner's case relies on manipulated recordings and conjecture, motivated by disappointment and financial opportunism. Amelia's opening was methodical and devastating. She outlined the timeline of events, focusing on the suspicious circumstances surrounding the will, change the convenient timing during my absence, and the mountain of evidence suggesting my grandfather had been improperly influenced. Your Honor, this case is about more than a house, she concluded. It's about protecting our elders from those who would exploit them at their most vulnerable. William Mitchell's true wishes were clear and consistent, until the defendants took advantage of his medical condition to substitute their financial interests for his clearly expressed intentions. The first witness called was Martha, Grandpa's home health nurse. Despite clearly being nervous, she testified firmly about Grandpa's mental acuity and the suspicious visit from my parents. Bradford Reynolds tried to suggest she might have romantic feelings for me that biased her testimony, a ridiculous allegation that Martha dismissed with professional indignation. Next came Emma, who walked the court through her forensic analysis of the will document, explaining the discrepancies in the metadata that suggested digital manipulation of the signature page. Reynolds tried to undermine her credibility by questioning her qualifications, but Emma's daily work in digital forensics for a major tech company made her difficult to discredit. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly as the evidence mounted. Judge Winters, initially impassive, began leaning forward during testimony, her expression increasingly troubled. After lunch break, it was Mr. Hemingway's turn to testify. He stuck to his affidavit's story, claiming Grandpa had been concerned about my financial responsibility. But under Amelia's cross-examination, he began to falter. She presented financial statements showing the substantial business relationships between his firm and my parents' law practice connections he had failed to disclose when serving as Grandpa's attorney. Would you agree, Mr. Hemingway, that these business relationships created a significant conflict of interest when advising William Mitchell about his estate planning? Amelia asked. Hemingway squirmed visibly. There was no conflict. I've known William for 40 years. Yet you never disclosed to him that you stood to gain financially from development deals involving the defendants, if the property was sold for development, rather than preserved as William wished. Before Hemingway could answer, Bradford Reynolds objected vehemently, but Judge Winters overruled him. The damage was done. Hemingway's credibility was crumbling before our eyes. Then came the moment I had been both dreading and waiting for, my turn to testify. As I walked to the witness stand, I felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom. My mother's eyes rolled dramatically, and my father looked away in disgust. But when I glanced at Judge Winters, I saw something else, a flicker of interest, perhaps even sympathy. After being sworn in, I began telling my story, my relationship with Grandpa, the years I'd spent caring for him, and his consistent statements about wanting me to inherit the family home. I explained, finding the recorder in the recordings that had revealed the truth about what happened during my absence. Miss Mitchell, Amelia said, "I'd like to play Exhibit C for the court now." This was the moment we'd prepared for. The bailiff set up the audio equipment, and suddenly Grandpa's voice filled the courtroom, weak but clear, objecting to changing his will, followed by my parents' voices, urging him to take medication and then taking advantage of his drugged state. The effect was immediate and powerful. Several people in the gallery gasped. The court reporter stopped typing for a moment, visibly shocked. Judge Winter's expression shifted from routine judicial attention to genuine alarm. Bradford Reynolds leapt to his feet. "Objection. These recordings could have been doctored. We have no way to authenticate the voices or confirm the context." "Your Honor," Amelia countered, "we have submitted expert analysis confirming these recordings have not been altered in any way. Additionally, the voices have been authenticated by multiple witnesses familiar with all parties." "Objection overruled," Judge Winters said firmly. "The court will hear the recordings in their entirety." As more recordings played, including the damning conversation between my parents about their plans for the property, I watched their faces. My mother had gone pale, while my father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tightly. They had never expected these private conversations to be heard by anyone, let alone in open court. When it was Bradford Reynolds' turn to cross-examine me, he went on the attack immediately, questioning my financial stability, suggesting I was motivated by greed, and even implying I had manipulated my elderly grandfather for years. "Isn't it true, Miss Mitchell, that you stood to benefit financially by isolating your grandfather from the rest of his family during his final years?" he demanded. "No, that's not true," I replied steadily. "I put my career on hold to care for him because I loved him. During those 5 years, I lived on my savings and a small stipend. He insisted on paying me far less than I would have earned in the marketing position I turned down. My parents visited only occasionally, despite living 20 minutes away." Reynolds tried another angle. "You claim these recordings prove your grandfather was being manipulated, yet isn't it convenient that he supposedly recorded exactly the conversations that support your narrative? Isn't it more likely that you've selected and possibly altered these recordings to serve your purpose?" Before I could answer, Amelia objected. "Your Honor, counsel is attempting to introduce speculation without foundation. The authenticity of these recordings has been verified by expert testimony." Sustained, Judge Winters ruled. "Mr. Reynolds, please confine your questions to facts in evidence." The cross-examination continued for almost an hour, but with each attempt to undermine my testimony, I responded calmly with the truth. When Reynolds finally ran out of questions, I felt exhausted but vindicated. The facts were speaking for themselves. The final witnesses of the day were my parents. My father took the stand first, projecting confidence and paternal concern. He spoke about his deep love for his father, and his concern that the valuable property would be squandered if left to me. My father was becoming increasingly confused in his final weeks, he claimed smoothly. He would say one thing one day, and something completely different the next. We updated the will to reflect what he had always wanted: financial security for the entire family, not just emotional attachment to a building. Amelia's cross-examination was surgical. She walked him through the timeline, highlighting the suspicious timing of the will change during my only absence, the conversation recorded by my grandfather, where they discussed giving him medication before signing documents, and the metadata evidence suggesting document manipulation. With each question, my father's composure cracked slightly. By the end, he was visibly sweating, his answers becoming shorter and more defensive. My mother's testimony followed a similar pattern. She attempted to portray herself as a concerned daughter-in-law who only wanted what was best for everyone, but under Amelia's questioning, contradictions emerged between her testimony and the recorded evidence. The most damaging moment came when Amelia played the recording of my mother discussing buying a vacation home in the Bahamas, with the proceeds from selling the property. "Mrs. Mitchell, do these sound like the words of someone concerned about preserving a family legacy? Amelia asked pointedly. My mother had no good answer. The facade was crumbling. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, Judge Winters addressed the courtroom. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for final arguments and my ruling. Her gaze swept over all parties, lingering for a moment on my parents. I want all counsel in my chambers immediately. Hey everyone, I know you're probably on the edge of your seats right now, wondering what Judge Winters is about to say to the lawyers in her chambers. I was definitely feeling the tension in that moment. If you're finding this family drama as intense as I did living through it, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about family justice and standing up for what's right, even when it means facing your own parents. I'm curious, have you ever had to confront a family member who betrayed your trust? Let me know in the comments below. The conclusion of this courtroom battle is coming right up, and trust me when I say, the judge's final decision will shock you. The meeting in Judge Winters' chambers lasted nearly an hour. I waited anxiously outside with Emma and Leah, imagining the heated discussions taking place behind the heavy wooden door. When Amelia finally emerged, her expression was unreadable. What happened? I asked immediately. Judge Winters is not happy with your parents or Mr. Hemingway, she said carefully. She's concerned about multiple ethics violations and potential criminal conduct. She's giving them until tomorrow morning to consider a settlement offer before she issues her ruling. What kind of settlement? One that would honor your grandfather's original wishes regarding the property, plus damages for the emotional distress and financial hardship you've endured. She also indicated she's considering referring the matter to the State Bar Association and possibly the District Attorney's Office for investigation. I felt lightheaded. After months of fighting against what seemed like insurmountable odds, vindication was suddenly within reach. But I also felt a strange hollowness. These were my parents. We were talking about the people who had raised me, taught me right from wrong, celebrated my achievements, and comforted me through disappointments. How had we ended up here? You should prepare yourself, Amelia continued gently. If they refuse to settle, the judge's ruling could include findings of fact that would severely damage your parents' professional reputations and possibly lead to criminal charges. Are you prepared for that? Was I? The question haunted me throughout the evening. I barely slept, tossing and turning as I wrestled with the implications. By morning I had made my decision. When we reconvened in court the next day, the atmosphere was tense. My parents looked haggard as though they too had spent a sleepless night. Bradford Reynolds conferred with them in hushed, urgent tones before the judge entered. All rise, called the bailiff as Judge Winters took her seat. Before we proceed with final arguments, she began, I understand the parties have been discussing a potential resolution. Mr. Reynolds, does your client wish to present a settlement offer? Reynolds stood. Yes, Your Honor. My clients propose transferring ownership of the property at 415 Maple Street to the petitioner Savannah Mitchell, in accordance with the terms of the original will. They will also cover all legal expenses incurred by the petitioner and provide additional compensation of $250,000 for emotional distress. Judge Winters turned to Amelia. Miss Washington, does your client find these terms acceptable? Amelia looked to me and I nodded. Yes, Your Honor, with one modification. My client requests that the additional compensation be reduced to $100,000, with the difference to be donated to the Elder Justice Initiative in William Mitchell's name. A murmur ran through the courtroom. No one had expected me to ask for less money than offered. My parents looked confused, exchanging glances with their attorney. Judge Winters studied me thoughtfully. Miss Mitchell, are you certain about this modification? You would be entitled to the full amount under the proposed settlement. I stood to address the court. Yes, Your Honor. This case has never been about money for me. It's about honoring my grandfather's wishes and standing up for what's right. The Elder Justice Initiative helps protect seniors from the kind of exploitation my grandfather experienced. I believe this donation would honor his memory and perhaps help prevent other families from going through what we have." Judge Winters nodded a hint of approval in her expression. "The court accepts this modification. The settlement will be recorded as stipulated." With the formalities completed, the case was officially resolved. As people began filing out of the courtroom, I found myself face to face with my parents for the first time, without attorneys or judges between us. My mother spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you reduce the settlement? Was it to make us look worse?" "No," I replied honestly. "It was because this was never about money. It was about truth and respect for Grandpa's wishes." My father couldn't meet my eyes. "You've destroyed our reputation in the legal community. Was that worth it? You destroyed that yourselves when you decided to take advantage of a dying man, your own father, for profit," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "I only exposed what you did." "We were trying to do what was best for everyone," my mother insisted, though her usual confidence was absent. "No. You were doing what was best for yourselves," I corrected her. "Grandpa knew exactly what he wanted, and it wasn't luxury condos or vacation homes in the Bahamas." They had no response to that. After an uncomfortable silence, my father finally asked, "What happens now?" It was a loaded question with no easy answer. How does a family move forward after such a fundamental breach of trust? The damage wasn't just to their professional reputations, it was to the very foundation of our relationship. "I don't know," I admitted. "That depends on whether you can acknowledge what you did and genuinely work to make amends. But right now I need time and space." As they walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for what had been lost. Yet underneath that sadness was a quiet certainty that I had done the right thing, not just for myself but for Grandpa's legacy. The weeks following the court case were strangely quiet. News of the settlement spread quickly through legal circles and our extended family. Some relatives reached out with support and apologies for doubting me. Others maintained their allegiance to my parents and cut ties completely. The family that had once gathered for holidays and celebrations was fractured, perhaps irrevocably. I moved into Grandpa's house, my house now, with mixed emotions. Every room held memories, both of the happy times with him and the bitter betrayal that had followed his death. At first, I felt like a visitor hesitant to make changes or truly claim the space as my own. Emma and Leah helped me sort through Grandpa's belongings, a process that was both therapeutic and heartbreaking. We found photo albums spanning decades, handwritten journals documenting family history, and even letters my father had written to him as a young man. Letters full of affection and respect that made the recent betrayal all the more puzzling. "People change," Emma suggested, as we read through one particularly heartfelt letter from my father to Grandpa after law school graduation. "Sometimes success and money reshape priorities until you hardly recognize yourself anymore. Or maybe they were always capable of this, and I just never saw it," I countered, struggling to reconcile the loving parents of my childhood with the calculating individuals who had drugged a dying man for financial gain. 3 weeks after the settlement, I received an unexpected call from Richard Jr. My brother had maintained his distance throughout the ordeal, firmly aligned with our parents. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Sav, we need to talk," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Can I come by the house tomorrow?" When Rich arrived the next day, I was shocked by his appearance. My normally immaculate brother looked disheveled and exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. "I owe you an apology," he said as soon as we sat down in Grandpa's study. "I should have listened to the recordings when you offered. I should have at least considered the possibility that you were telling the truth." "What changed your mind?" I asked cautiously. He ran a hand through his hair. "I overheard Mom and Dad talking last night. They didn't know I was home." "They were." They were discussing how they could have better covered their tracks, how they should have destroyed the recorder. He shook his head in disbelief. They weren't denying what they'd done, they were just regretting that they got caught. The revelation clearly devastated him. For all his loyalty to our parents, Rich had never imagined they were actually guilty of what I'd accused them of. Like me, he was now grappling with a shattered perception of the people who raised us. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know. I moved out this morning. I'm staying with a friend until I figure things out." He looked around the study, taking in the shelves of books and the view of the garden through the window. "Grandpa really did love this place, didn't he? I never understood it like you did." "It's not just about the house," I explained. "It's what it represents: continuity, family history, the idea that some things have value beyond their price tag." We talked for hours that day, beginning the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. Rich shared that he had always felt pressured to follow in our parents' footsteps pursuing law when he would have preferred architecture. I admitted my own insecurities about being the family disappointment for choosing a more modest career path in nonprofit marketing. "Maybe we both need to figure out who we are outside of their expectations," I suggested. The conversation with Rich marked a turning point. I began to see the house not just as a repository of painful memories, but as an opportunity for a fresh start. I decided to honor Grandpa's legacy while making the space truly my own. First, I contacted a historical preservation consultant to assess what renovations could be done while maintaining the home's architectural integrity. Together we developed a plan to update the plumbing and electrical systems, restore the original woodwork, and convert the carriage house into a community art studio, a project Grandpa had always talked about but never completed. To finance the renovations without depleting my savings, I applied my marketing background to a new venture. I partnered with a local historical society to occasionally open parts of the house for educational tours about Victorian architecture and the area's history. The modest income this generated, combined with careful budgeting of the settlement money, allowed me to maintain the property while gradually implementing the improvements. As months passed, my relationship with Rich strengthened. He eventually moved into the carriage house temporarily, while designing sustainable, affordable housing projects, the architecture career he had always wanted. His expertise proved invaluable during the renovation process. My parents, however, remained distant. They had relocated to Florida shortly after the settlement, ostensibly for a change of scenery, but more likely to escape the professional fallout from the case. They sent formal Christmas and birthday cards with no personal messages, maintaining the minimal contact expected of estranged family members. Then, exactly 1 year after the court case, I received a letter with a Florida postmark. Unlike the impersonal cards, this was handwritten in my father's distinctive script. With trembling hands, I opened it, unsure what to expect. "Dear Savannah," it began. "I've written this letter a dozen times in my head over the past year, never finding the right words. Perhaps there are no right words for what we did. Your mother and I have spent months justifying our actions to ourselves and each other, but the truth is painfully simple: we were wrong. Completely unforgivably wrong." The letter continued, explaining how the pursuit of financial success had gradually corrupted their perspective over decades of legal practice, how they had convinced themselves that emotional attachments to things like family homes were irrational and impractical, and how the opportunity to develop the property had seemed like the logical choice, regardless of Grandpa's wishes. It took losing nearly everything, our reputation, our practice, our relationship with our children, to realize how far we had strayed from the values we once held dear and claimed to be teaching you. The irony is not lost on me that you, whom we often criticized for being impractical, demonstrated more integrity and courage than we did. The letter ended with no request for forgiveness or reconciliation, just an acknowledgement of wrongdoing and an expression of deep regret. It was signed simply, "Your father." I sat with that letter for days, unsure how to respond, or even if I should. The wound was still raw, the betrayal still vivid in my memory. But there was also a tiny seed of hope that perhaps in time some form of relationship might be salvaged from the wreckage of trust. In the end, I wrote back a brief note, acknowledging his letter and expressing appreciation for the difficult admission. I made no promises about the future of our relationship, but left the door open a crack for continued communication. Meanwhile, life at the house took on new rhythms. The renovations progressed steadily. I found joy in restoring Grandpa's beloved gardens, planting heirloom varieties he had cultivated, and adding my own selections. The community art studio in the carriage house became a vibrant space where local artists taught classes for neighborhood children. Most surprisingly, I discovered my own passion for historic preservation. What began as a personal project to honor Grandpa's wishes expanded into advocacy work. I joined the board of the local historical society and began consulting with other homeowners about sensitive renovation approaches that respected architectural heritage while meeting modern needs. 2 years after Grandpa's death, the house transformation was complete. To celebrate, I hosted an open house for extended family, friends, and community members. Many relatives who had sided with my parents initially came with awkward apologies and genuine admiration for what I'd accomplished with the property. My parents did not attend, though they sent a potted magnolia tree for the garden, with a card that read simply, "For William's legacy." It was a small gesture, but significant in its acknowledgement of what the house represented. As twilight fell on the gathering, I found myself on the porch swing Grandpa and I had often shared during his final summer. Emma joined me, handing me a glass of lemonade. "He would be so proud of you," she said, looking out at the gardens where guests mingled. "Not just for saving the house, but for everything you've built from the wreckage of what happened." "Sometimes I still can't believe they did it," I admitted. "That my own parents could betray not just me but Grandpa that way." "People are complicated," Emma replied. "They can love their family and still make terrible choices when money and status are involved. The important thing is you didn't let their choices define you." She was right. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forced me to discover my own strength and clarify my values. I had preserved not just a house but a legacy of integrity that would outlast the painful memories. As guests began to depart, Rich found me still on the porch. "I've been thinking," he said, settling beside me on the swing. "What if we established a foundation in Grandpa's name, something focused on elder advocacy and historic preservation? We could use part of the settlement money as seed funding." The idea resonated immediately. It would transform the painful experience into something constructive, potentially helping others avoid similar situations while honoring what Grandpa valued most. "I think he would love that," I agreed. The William Mitchell Foundation for Elder Justice and Heritage Preservation was established 6 months later, with both Rich and me serving on the board alongside legal experts in elder law and historic preservation specialists. The Foundation's first project was creating educational materials about elder financial abuse for distribution to senior centers, medical offices, and community organizations. 3 years after the court case, the Foundation received an anonymous donation of $500, exactly the amount I had declined in the settlement. There was no note, but the timing coincided with my parents' retirement from their scaled-back legal practice in Florida. I chose to interpret it as a form of amends, another small step in the long uncertain process of healing family wounds. The journey from betrayal to rebuilding had been neither quick nor easy. There were still difficult days when the pain of what happened felt fresh, still awkward family gatherings where certain subjects remained off-limits. But gradually, the focus shifted from what had been lost to what had been created in its place: a preserved family legacy, a foundation doing meaningful work, and my own life built on principles I could be proud of. The house that had been the center of such bitter conflict became a symbol of resilience and renewal, much like the family that was slowly and imperfectly finding its way back to some new version of wholeness. 5 years after the court case that had torn our family apart, I stood once again in a courtroom, but under very different circumstances. This time, I wasn't fighting a personal battle, but representing the William Mitchell Foundation for Elder Justice in a landmark case against a predatory financial services company that had systematically targeted seniors for complex, high-fee investment products they neither needed nor fully understood. Our foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations, evolving from a small family initiative into a respected advocacy organization with a legal defense fund for elderly victims of financial abuse. The case before the court today represented 2 years of investigative work gathering evidence from dozens of affected seniors and building a class action lawsuit that could potentially change industry practices. As I prepared to give my statement as the Foundation's director, I glanced around the crowded courtroom. Rich sat in the front row offering an encouraging nod. Next to him was Martha, Grandpa's former nurse, who now served on our advisory board, providing invaluable insights from her years of working with vulnerable seniors. In the back row, partially obscured by other spectators but unmistakable, were my parents. They had arrived quietly just before proceedings began, making no effort to approach or speak to me. Their presence was unexpected. We had maintained only minimal formal contact over the years, primarily through holiday cards and occasional brief emails about family matters. Judge Caroline Winters was presiding, the same judge who had overseen my case 5 years earlier. When she recognized me approaching the podium, a flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by a small knowing smile. "Miss Mitchell," she acknowledged. "Please proceed with your statement." I outlined the Foundation's findings, detailing the patterns of exploitation we had documented, and the devastating impact on seniors who had lost retirement savings they couldn't replace. Throughout my presentation, I felt my parents' eyes on me, their expressions unreadable from where I stood. When the day's proceedings concluded, with the judge ruling that our class action could move forward, a tangible sense of victory filled the courtroom. Elderly plaintiffs embraced each other and their family members, many with tears in their eyes. For some, this was the first acknowledgement that they hadn't simply made poor financial decisions but had been deliberately targeted and misled. As people filed out, I found myself face to face with my parents in the courthouse hallway. 5 years had aged them visibly, my father's hair now completely gray, my mother's face lined with wrinkles that hadn't been there before. They stood awkwardly, clearly uncertain about how to approach me in this public setting. "Savannah," my father said finally, "you were impressive in there." "Thank you," I replied, unsure what else to say. We had never properly addressed the elephant in the room, their actions, the court case, the fracturing of our family. Our limited communications had carefully skirted these topics, focusing instead on safe, superficial matters. My mother cleared her throat. "The Foundation is doing important work. Your grandfather would be proud." The mention of Grandpa hung in the air between us, loaded with unspoken history. For a moment I considered making polite small talk and moving on, maintaining the careful distance we had established. But something about this moment, standing victorious in a courtroom fighting for other vulnerable elders like Grandpa, compelled me toward honesty. "Why are you here?" I asked directly. After all this time, my parents exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We saw the news about the case," my father explained. "And we wanted to see the work you've been doing. The foundation that carries Dad's name. We've been following the Foundation's progress for years," my mother added softly. From a distance, this revelation surprised me. I had assumed they preferred not to think about the Foundation given its origins and their disgrace. "We've changed, Savannah," my father continued, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "Not enough, perhaps. Not quickly. but watching you transform what happened, what we did, into something that helps others. It's been a powerful lesson. The anonymous donation, I said, suddenly making the connection. 5 years ago, that was you. My mother nodded. It seemed like the least we could do. We couldn't undo what we'd done, but we could support what you were building. The courthouse hallway was emptying now, the day's business concluding around us. Rich approached cautiously, sensing the significance of the conversation but hesitant to interrupt. We're having a small celebration for the legal team and plaintiffs at Grandpa's house, my house, I found myself saying. You're welcome to come. If you want to. The invitation surprised them as much as it surprised me. It wasn't forgiveness exactly that would require more time, more conversations, more evidence of genuine change. But it was an opening, a possibility. We'd like that, my father said simply. That evening, the house that had once been the center of our family's ugliest conflict hosted a gathering that felt like the beginning of something new. My parents moved somewhat awkwardly through spaces that had once been familiar to them, clearly taken aback by the thoughtful renovations that had preserved the home's character while making it uniquely mine. I watched as my father paused before a wall of photographs in the living room, a timeline I had created, documenting the house's history through generations. The centerpiece was a large portrait of Grandpa William in his judge's robes, his expression stern but his eyes kind. He always did have that look, my father commented when he noticed me watching him. Like he could see right through whatever argument you were trying to make. He could, I agreed, standing beside him to look at the photograph. He taught me to look for truth even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it's about people you love. My father's eyes glistened with what might have been tears. I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. Started believing that winning was more important than being right. It was the closest he had come to directly acknowledging what they had done outside of that one letter years ago. Not quite an apology, but an admission of the flawed thinking that had led to their actions. The evening progressed with careful conversation, everyone conscious of navigating the complicated dynamics. By the time my parents left, something had shifted subtly, a door had been opened that had been firmly closed for years. Over the following months, we began the slow work of rebuilding some version of family relationship. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations, painful acknowledgments, moments when old anger flared. But there were also small steps forward, my mother volunteering to help with the foundation's community outreach, my father offering legal counsel to seniors pro bono as a form of amends. A year after that courthouse reunion, we gathered for Thanksgiving dinner at the house, the first holiday we had spent together since before Grandpa's death. As we sat around the dining room table that had hosted Mitchell family gatherings for generations, I realized that the house had come full circle, from a source of bitter division to a place of tentative healing. After dinner, I found my father on the porch, gazing out at the property in the fading November light. You know, he said as I joined him, your grandfather once told me that houses have souls, that they absorb the energy of the lives lived within them. I thought it was sentimental nonsense at the time. And now, I asked. He considered the question. Now I think he might have been right. This place feels reconciled somehow. Like it's witnessed the worst of us and the best of us and somehow accommodated both. It was an apt description for where we found ourselves as a family, not restored to what we had been before, but creating something new from the remnants, acknowledging the damage done while choosing to build something better. The William Mitchell Foundation continued to grow, eventually establishing a national reputation for its work, protecting vulnerable elders, and preserving family legacies. Rich and I remained its driving forces, but over time, our parents became increasingly involved, perhaps seeking redemption, perhaps genuinely converted to the cause, or most likely some complex combination of both. 10 years after the original court case, Judge Caroline Winters, now retired, visited the foundation offices to see our work firsthand. As I gave her a tour of our expanded operations, she commented on the journey. "When you walked into my courtroom that day with those recordings, I never imagined it would lead to all this," she said, gesturing around at the busy office, where staff members were counseling, seniors preparing educational materials, and building cases against predatory companies. "Neither did I admitted. "I was just trying to honor my grandfather's wishes." "You've done far more than that," she observed. "You've created his legacy." Later that evening, I sat on the porch swing of the house that had started it all, reflecting on the unexpected path my life had taken. What had begun as a painful betrayal had transformed into purpose-building protection for others that my grandfather hadn't had. The house stood solid around me, its century-old foundations supporting new life and work. Like the family it sheltered, it had weathered storms, absorbed damage, undergone repairs, and emerged transformed but intact, carrying forward the past while creating space for the future. Justice, I had learned, rarely arrives in the form we expect. Sometimes it comes through courtroom victories, sometimes through changed hearts, sometimes through the work that rises from the ashes of betrayal. For my grandfather, for the seniors we now helped, and even for my own wounded heart, it had come full circle, not erasing the harm done, but transforming it into something redemptive. As the sun set over the property that had been the center of so much conflict and eventual healing, I felt a deep sense of peace. Grandpa William had been right all along. Some legacies are worth fighting for, not for their monetary value, but for the truths they preserve and the future they make possible. Hey everyone, this is where my story comes full circle, from that moment in the courtroom to the life and purpose I've found today. I hope sharing this family journey has resonated with some of you who might be going through your own challenges with family betrayal or difficult choices. Life lessons from revenge stories like mine often teach us that true justice isn't always about punishment, but about rebuilding something meaningful from what was broken. I'd love to know if you've experienced something similar, or what you would have done in my situation. Did karma come back around in your family story too? Please drop a comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Your perspective might really help someone else going through something similar right now. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, justice, and healing. Sharing this video might help someone who's struggling with their own family betrayal to find hope for resolution. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. Remember that even in our darkest family moments, there's always a path forward if we stay true to our values and keep our hearts open to the possibility of healing, even when it seems impossible. I'll be back next week with another story, and until then, take care of yourselves and the elders in your lives who need your protection and love.